So today we're going to be talking about your practice a little further. And we're going to be talking about how to let the mind observe things without getting entangled by what's happening. To just let the meditation do its own thing. The key here is to allow your mind to observe things like it is watching a movie without getting attached to what's going on, without getting so engrossed that it starts to want to control what's going on. You're just watching a movie, you're having fun, and you're enjoying the process. And the sutta I've chosen today is Majjhima Nikaya 143. And this is called Anathapindika Vada Sutta, the advice to Anathapindika. I will begin. Thus have I heard on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now on that occasion the householder Anathapindika was afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill. Then he addressed a certain man thus, "Come, good man, go to the Blessed One, pay homage in my name with your head at his feet, and say, Venerable Sir, the householder Anathapindika is afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill." He pays homage with his head at the Blessed One's feet. Then go to the Venerable Sariputta, pay homage in my name with your head at his feet, and say, Venerable Sir, the householder Anathapindika is afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill. He pays homage with his head at the Venerable Sariputta's feet. Then say, it would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Venerable Sariputta would come to the residence of the householder Anathapindika out of compassion. Yes, sir, the man replied, and he went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to the Blessed One, he sat down at one side and delivered his message. Then he went to the Venerable Sariputta, and after paying homage to the Venerable Sariputta, he delivered his message, saying, it would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Venerable Sariputta would come to the residence of the householder Anathapindika out of compassion. The Venerable Sariputta consented in silence. Then the Venerable Sariputta dressed and taking his bowl and outer robe went to the residence of the householder Anathapindika, with the Venerable Ananda as his attendant. Having gone there, he sat down on a seat made ready, and said to the householder Anathapindika, I hope you are getting well, householder. I hope you are comfortable. I hope your painful feelings are subsiding and not increasing, and that their subsiding, not their increase, is apparent. Venerable Sariputta, I am not getting well. I am not comfortable. My painful feelings are increasing, not subsiding. Their increase and not their subsiding is apparent. Just as if a strong man were splitting my head open with a sharp sword, so too violent winds cut through my head. I am not getting well. Just as if a strong man were tightening a tough leather strap around my head as a headband, so too there are violent pains in my head. I am not getting well. Just as if a skilled butcher or his apprentice were to carve up an ox's belly with a sharp butcher's knife, so too violent winds are carving up my belly. I am not getting well. Just as if two strong men were to seize a weaker man by both arms and roast him over a pit of coals, hot coals, so too there is a violent burning in my body. I am not getting well. I am not comfortable. My painful feelings are increasing, not subsiding. Their increase and not their subsiding is apparent. So that's quite the state of mind and body the householder Anathapindika is in. He's experiencing fever, he's experiencing all kinds of bodily pain, all kinds of intestinal pain, and he's not getting any better. So Sariputta is going to give him some instruction. So I would like you to pay close attention to what is going to be read now, because this is going to give you some clarity on not just the meditation practice, but in your daily living in general, and how you should observe mind and how you should observe not only the meditation practice, but all experiences that are arising and passing away in your daily life. Then, householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to the eye, and my consciousness will not be dependent on the eye. Thus you should train. You should train thus. I will not cling to the ear. I will not cling to the nose. I will not cling to the tongue. I will not cling to the body. I will not cling to the mind, and my consciousness will not be dependent on the ear or the nose or the tongue or the body or the mind. Thus you should train. What does this mean? My consciousness will not be dependent upon these things. In other words, whatever consciousness arises dependent upon contact between the eye and form, between ear and sound, between nose and smell, between tongue and taste, between body and tangibles, between mind and thoughts. And that consciousness can get tied up and create mental proliferation. In the same way, when you are meditating, your mind is with its object of meditation. You are observing how mind is with its object of meditation, how mind is meditating. But you don't get tied up in that. If you're doing the forgiveness practice, you're just watching how you are saying the words, I forgive myself for not understanding. But you're not getting tied up in what is the meaning of forgiveness or how does forgiveness work. You're not getting tied up when you're practicing compassion. What is the feeling of compassion and how it is affecting others? You are just experiencing that compassion. You are just experiencing that forgiveness. You are just experiencing that loving kindness. Don't allow the mind to deviate from just observing things as they really are. If it goes into analytical mode, if it goes into a mode which starts to look at and perceive and judge and examine and think and proliferate, then you are no longer on your object of meditation. Now the mind is deviating and now you have forgotten that you are meditating completely. But when you recognize it, you can recognize it, release your attention, relax, we smile, return. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to forms. I will not cling to sounds. I will not cling to odors. I will not cling to flavors. I will not cling to tangibles. I will not cling to mind objects. Mind objects here meaning I will not cling to the loving kindness. I will not cling to the compassion. I will not cling to the joy. I will not cling to the equanimity. I will not cling to the forgiveness. Whatever your object is, whatever the meditation is, the mind is not clinging to it. What does clinging mean? Clinging means you are creating and rationalizing what is happening. You're creating rationales for what's happening. I like this is the craving because so-and-so is the clinging. I don't like this is the craving because of this or because they did this to me and I like this and this is my favorite and I don't like that because something happened to me in my childhood and all of these things. That's clinging. That mental proliferation is the beginning. That beginning of mental proliferation is the clinging, rather. That clinging is that which operates in the mind or processes in the mind all of those things that are arising and taking it to be mine, me, and myself. That clinging sees that and starts to create notions about what it is and what it isn't. It starts to proliferate ideas, generate all kinds of concepts about what it is or what it should be or what it isn't and what it should not be. So when your mind, your consciousness becomes dependent upon forms, dependent upon sounds, dependent upon smells, dependent upon flavors, dependent upon the breeze flowing by, dependent upon the object of meditation itself. That means getting enamored by it, making it personal, taking it as me, mine, or myself. Whenever your consciousness gets dependent upon it, then the mind becomes tense. The mind has tightness. And there is craving, further clinging, further being that arises. And so Sariputta says, my consciousness will not be dependent upon these things. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to I consciousness. I will not cling to ear consciousness. I will not cling to nose consciousness. I will not cling to tongue consciousness. I will not cling to body consciousness. I will not cling to mind consciousness. And my consciousness will not be dependent on these consciousnesses. Thus you should train. I consciousness is that which arises dependent upon the contact between the eye and form. You see something wonderful. You see a beautiful movie or a beautiful piece of painting, or you see a beautiful scenery. Now the consciousness dependent upon that contact arises, and there's the seeing. And if that consciousness further becomes dependent upon that scenery, upon that image, then it starts to create all kinds of ideas, and that creates the clinging process. And that creates the idea that this is mine, this is me, this is myself. In the meditation, when you are with the loving kindness, when you are radiating loving kindness or you're radiating compassion, you're not pushing. Anytime you push, your consciousness is dependent upon that object, and you're trying too much, you're pushing too hard. But if you allow the mind's attention to be in one direction and just observe without the consciousness being dependent upon what's being radiated, then you are doing the practice in an effective manner. Then the practice becomes effortless. The only effort when you're radiating is to just watch in that direction and how the flow of metta goes through, or how the flow of compassion goes through, or how the flow of joy goes through. And then when you radiate in all directions at the same time, you're observing the same thing, except now it's in all directions. But it's the observation, not getting caught up in it, not pushing it, not trying so hard, not analyzing it, not making it something more than it should be. It is just a temporary aspect of the meditation. Don't get attached to what's going on. Observe everything. Even if there are factors of the jhanas, even if you're seeing infinite space, even if you're seeing infinite consciousness, don't allow the mind to get caught up in it. Just observe how mind responds. When you see it's getting distracted from radiating, iksar, and come back and keep radiating. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to eye contact. I will not cling to ear contact. I will not cling to nose contact. I will not cling to tongue contact. I will not cling to body contact. I will not cling to mind contact. And my consciousness will not be dependent on mind contact. Thus you should train. What is eye contact? That is the actual impingement upon the eye. So what we are looking at is the eye consciousness arises when the form and the eye meet. But the meeting of these is actually contact in itself. And if your consciousness gets tied up, gets caught up in this, then you start to personalize that. Then there's craving that arises. Then there is clinging and being, birth of action, which causes suffering. In the same way, when you're meditating, the contact that arises in the jhana, or contact that arises in the practice, is the meeting of the mind with its object. It's the meeting of the mind with loving kindness. It's the meeting of the mind with radiating loving kindness. It's meeting of the mind with radiating loving kindness to a spiritual friend, or it's meeting of the mind experiencing forgiveness. But don't allow the mind to get caught up in the meeting of these. Just observe what is happening. Allow the consciousness to be fluid. Don't let it become caught up and dependent upon it, which will cause further craving for it. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to feeling born of eye contact. I will not cling to feeling born of ear contact. I will not cling to feeling born of nose contact. I will not cling to feeling born of tongue contact. I will not cling to feeling born of body contact. I will not cling to feeling born of mind contact. And my consciousness will not be dependent on feeling born of mind contact. Thus you should train. Now we are talking about feeling. We're talking about Vedana, sensation, and experience. So when you experience metta, that's just a feeling born of the mind going on its object of meditation. And then you might experience cofactors of that, which are the different factors of the jhana. You might experience joy, or you might experience expansiveness. Or when you get into the arupa, you experience infinite space, or you experience infinite consciousness, or you experience nothingness, or you experience neither perception nor non-perception. But these are all feelings. These are all experiences. If you allow the mind to get caught up in that, then you become distracted. Observe and see if mind gets distracted, and then let go using the 6R process. So the metta itself should not be held onto. The compassion itself should not be held onto. The joy itself should not be held onto. The equanimity should not be held onto. The quiet mind should not be held onto. It should just be seen. All of these should be seen as progressive steps in a natural unfolding of the meditation. Whatever is happening, you are just observing. Your job is to do two things: observe and 6R when you get distracted. Observe and 6R. That's it. Now Sariputta is going to get into the territory of different elements and things like that. And there's a reason why he's doing it. And I'm going to connect this with a couple of other suttas, smaller suttas, that will understand why he's talking about this. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to the earth element. I will not cling to the water element. I will not cling to the fire element. I will not cling to the air element. I will not cling to the space element. I will not cling to the consciousness element. And my consciousness will not be dependent on the consciousness element. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to material form. I will not cling to feeling. I will not cling to perception. I will not cling to formations. I will not cling to consciousness. And my consciousness will not be dependent on consciousness. Thus you should train. In other words, his consciousness will not be dependent upon the feeling, the perception, the formations. It won't be dependent upon any of the 4 or 6 elements in this case. The 6 element, well, yes, the 6 elements in this case. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to the base of infinite space. Meaning, when you are in infinite space, that's all it is. You're observing now, the mind is experiencing the expansiveness of space, but it's still with its object of radiating compassion or radiating loving kindness, whatever it might be. But it's not clinging, not either to infinite space or to the compassion or loving kindness. I will not cling to the base of infinite consciousness. You are just observing now, mind is experiencing infinite consciousness. Now there is an experience of joy, but there is no clinging to it. You're not saying or not experiencing the form of this is my joy, or I am in infinite consciousness. It is just a natural unfolding. I will not cling to the base of nothingness. Now you are just seeing mind is in nothingness. It is perceiving nothingness, and it is now experiencing equanimity. I will not cling to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, and my consciousness will not be dependent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception, nor in any of these prior states. My consciousness will not be dependent upon the base of infinite space, or the base of infinite consciousness, or the base of nothingness. When you are neither perception nor non-perception, the moment you perceive that you are in it, you are no longer in it. That's the tricky thing about this state. When you are neither perception or non-perception, you are just aware of quiet mind to that extent that there is this radiant mind void of anything else. And the moment you start to perceive further by recognizing things or labeling or noting, now you come out of the base of neither perception or non-perception. So when you get to quiet mind, just relax into it. Just keep relaxing into it and just stay with the quiet mind. When you start to see the bubbling upper formations, relax them, 6R them, and come back to this quiet mind. The longer you are in quiet mind without any distraction, the easier it'll be for the mind to just slip into the cessation of perception, feeling, consciousness. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to this world, and my consciousness will not be dependent on this world. I will not cling to the world beyond, and my consciousness will not be dependent on the world beyond. Thus you should train. Householder, you should train thus. I will not cling to what is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, encountered, sought after, and examined by the mind, and my consciousness will not be dependent on that. What does this mean? Whatever it is that you're experiencing in the way of the six sense bases, when you are out and about, whether you're doing walking practice or you're running errands or whatever it is you're doing outside of your formal sitting and walking practice, all of these are impersonal experiences. All of these are experiences that arose due to some cause and condition. And you see it in such a way so that your mind doesn't deviate towards it. Your mind doesn't get distracted. You are ever mindful. That doesn't mean when you're eating your food, you're just mindfully eating in the sense of taking a bite of food and enjoying that food. That's all fine, but you're not getting clung to it. The moment you start to say, I'm mindfully eating, where I'm tasting, now I'm noting that I am tasting. Now I'm noting that I'm swallowing. Now I'm noting the smell of whatever it is that I'm eating or consuming, and so on. All of that creates in the mind this process of proliferation. Mindfulness is observing how mind is responding to all of this. It's not about noting. It's not about saying, now I am doing this. Now this is happening. Now I am doing this. Now this is happening. You don't even have to label it. Just watch how mind is responding. If mind becomes agitated, if mind is having craving, if mind is having aversion, if mind is identifying and making it personal, notice that. That is the first step of recognizing. Release the attention from there and relax the tension, relax the tightness associated with that distraction, and come back to the smile, come back to it, whatever it is that you're doing before you got distracted. Mindfulness is not about paying attention to what is going on in the present moment. It's not just that. It's observing how mind is responding to situations. You have to understand that if you don't observe what is happening with regards to mind's attention, then it will be liable to slip into lack of mindfulness. It will be liable to slip into ignorance. It will be liable to slip into craving, taking things personal and causing itself suffering. But the moment you start to just observe how mind is experiencing everything without noting, without just seeing things as they are, then you see the impersonal nature of all things, and your mind doesn't get clung or doesn't cling to what is seen. It doesn't cling to what is heard. It doesn't cling to what is sensed. It doesn't cling to what is cognized. It doesn't cling to what is encountered. It doesn't cling to what is sought after. It doesn't cling to what is examined by the mind. And your awareness is not dependent upon that. It doesn't get tied up in it. In other words, there is only the seeing that's happening. There's only the process of hearing that is happening. There's only the process of sensing. There's only the process of cognizing without any kind of judgment. This is a process of observing without labeling, observing without judgment, observing without proliferation, without creating or projecting onto what is being observed any ideas or notions that can be clung to and then create further mental suffering. Thus, you should train. Now, before I continue, I want to just take a sidetrack to a couple of suttas, because it will provide a little bit of clarity of why it is that Sariputta is talking to Anathapindika about these particular things of not to cling to. And it is in a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, which is in the book of Tens. Yes, looks like it's in the book of Tens, and it is number 6 and number 7 in there. And the first one is called concentration, but it should be also called meditation. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One and paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, Venerable Bhante, he says to the Blessed One, could a bhikkhu obtain such a state of meditation that he would not be percipient of earth in relation to earth? He would not be percipient of water in relation to water. He would not be percipient of fire in relation to fire. He would not be percipient of air in relation to air. He would not be percipient of the base of infinite space in relation to the base of infinite space. He would not be percipient of the base of infinite consciousness in relation to the base of infinite consciousness. He would not be percipient of the base of nothingness in relation to the base of nothingness. He would not be percipient of the base of neither perception nor non-perception in relation to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He would not be percipient of this world in relation to this world. He would not be percipient of the other world in relation to the other world, but he would still be percipient. So what is Ananda pointing out here? He's pointing out all of the same things Sariputta is instructing Anathapindika to let go of, to not to cling to. And the Buddha says he could, Ananda. And Ananda asks, but how could he obtain such a state of meditation? And the Buddha says, here, Ananda, one is percipient thus. This is peaceful. This is sublime. That is the stilling of all activities, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, Nibana. It is in this way, Ananda, that a bhikkhu could obtain such a state of meditation that he would not be percipient of earth, water, fire, air, infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception or non-perception of this world or the other world, but he would still be percipient. So what Sariputta is directing Anathapindika's mind towards is the experience of Nibbana itself. So in other words, when you are meditating, remember that what you are meditating for is the experience, or let's say the non-experience, because it is the unconditioned. But you are meditating so that the mind inclines towards Nibbana. Don't get caught up in what kind of jhana you're in. Don't get caught up where you are at. Don't get caught up in whether you're in infinite space or infinite consciousness. Don't get caught up in whether you have to stay with compassion or you have to stay with the joy. Allow it to unfold on its own, because the way you do it is, if you continue to unfold, you are experiencing the different levels of cessation until you experience the complete cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And when you experience the complete cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, and you come back up, that is to say, the mind comes back up, then it experiences the unconditioned. It experiences Nibbana. It experiences wisdom in seeing the links of dependent origination. And that is how one would still be percipient, meaning that is how one would perceive after coming out of that state and experiencing that non-experience of Nibbana, experiencing the unconditioned. There is a similar sutta to this, which is the sutta right after that, that is number 7, that is for Sariputta. And here it says, then the Venerable Ananda approached the Venerable Sariputta and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, he sat down to one side and said to the Venerable Sariputta, friend Sariputta, could a bhikkhu obtain such a state of meditation that, again, he would not be percipient of earth in relation to earth, water in relation to water, fire in relation to fire, air in relation to air, the base of infinite space in relation to the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness in relation to the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness in relation to the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception in relation to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, of this world in relation to this world, of the other world in relation to the other world, but he would still be percipient. He could, friend Ananda. But how, friend Sariputta, could he obtain such a state of meditation? And so Sariputta says, on one occasion, friend Ananda, I was dwelling right here in Savatthi, in the blind men's grove. There I attained such a state of meditation that I was not percipient of earth in relation to earth, of water in relation to water, of fire in relation to fire, of air in relation to air, of the base of infinite space in relation to the base of infinite space, of the base of infinite consciousness in relation to the base of infinite consciousness, of the base of nothingness in relation to the base of nothingness, of the base of neither perception nor non-perception in relation to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, of this world in relation to this world, of the other world in relation to the other world, but I was still percipient. But of what was the Venerable Sariputta percipient on that occasion? One perception arose and another perception ceased in me. The cessation of being is Nibana. The cessation of being is Nibana. Just as when a fire of twigs is burning, one flame arises and another flame ceases, so one perception arose and another perception ceased in me. The cessation of being is Nibana. The cessation of being is Nibana. On that occasion, friend, I was percipient. Cessation of being is Nibana. The Sariputta, being an arahat in the sutta, is talking about his experience where he is able to go into cessation, come out of it, and experience the unconditioned. The unconditioned meaning the cessation of being, the cessation of clinging, the cessation of craving, the cessation of feeling, cessation of contact, the cessation of the 6 sense bases, the cessation of nama rupa, and the cessation of consciousness. Another way to understand this is that his consciousness was not dependent upon any experience. It experienced the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, and when it came back up, it was not even dependent upon any of the links of dependent origination. It saw it without getting tied to it. The mind or the mindfulness was so sharp that it did not cling to any of the links as they arose and ceased. So when there was the arising of Namarupa, when there was the arising of contact or the 6 sense bases, when there was the arising of contact, when there was the arising of feeling, when there was the arising of perception, because perception is tied to feeling, there was no consciousness tied to it. There was no clinging to it. There was no personalizing or identifying with. Similarly, when you are in jhana, when you are meditating, you are just observing things as they really are without getting tied up to them, tied up with them, without getting caught up in them, without making the mind say that this is me, this is mine, this is myself. When you do that, you are further ceasing any kind of craving for that experience. You are ceasing any further clinging for that experience. You are ceasing any further identification with that experience. You are therefore ceasing being, and your mind is inclining towards the unconditioned. The mind is clinging towards Nibbana. So the more you get caught up in something, See it for yourself. The more you get caught up in something, the farther away your mind tends towards Nibbana. But the more your mind lets go and just sees things as they really are without getting caught up in them, the closer it inclines towards Nibbana. And you see this when the mind becomes lighter, when the mind becomes brighter, when the mind becomes more radiant, when the mind becomes more tranquil, when the mind becomes disenchanted and has dispassion, which, as we talked about yesterday, leads to the cessation experience and therefore the experience of the unconditioned. Let's go back to the other sutta. When this was said, the householder Anathapindika wept and shed tears. Then the Venerable Ananda asked him, "Are you foundering, householder? Are you sinking?" "I am not foundering, Venerable Ananda. I am not sinking. But although I have long waited upon the teacher," that is to say the Buddha, "and bhikkhus worthy of esteem, never before have I heard such a talk on the Dhamma. Such a talk on the Dhamma, householder, is not given to lay people clothed in white. Such talk on the Dhamma is given to those who have gone forth." This is an interesting statement. Bhante Vimalaramsi made a comment on this statement, which is to say that the statement implies that there are secret teachings. The statement implies that there are teachings given to lay people and there are teachings given to monastics. And really, there is no distinction given to what kind of teaching is given to one or the other. You'll see in the suttas, the Buddha talks to lay people in one way and monastics in a different way. But he gives them the same teaching, the teaching towards the unbinding, towards the unconditioned. He gives them the teaching of letting go. He gives them the teaching of understanding and wisdom. He doesn't differentiate in that sense. Yes, there are some teachings that are deeper, but those teachings are deeper only because of the certain students or there are certain listeners that are receiving those teachings, because the mind of those listeners is come to a certain level of development where they can understand on a deeper level because of practice, because of experience. But generally speaking, there is no such distinction given in terms of the teaching itself. There's no secret esoteric teachings. The Buddha always said that my teachings are freely given. I have no esoteric teachings. These are all the teachings that I give, namely the Four Noble Truths, suffering and the cessation of suffering. And therefore he then he elaborates through the understanding of dependent origination what is suffering, and through the understanding of practice, the Eightfold Path, how to let go of that suffering and experience the cessation of that suffering. "Well then, Venerable Sariputta," says Anathapindika, "let such talk on the Dhamma be given to lay people clothed in white. There are clansmen with little dust in their eyes who are wasting away through not hearing such a talk on the Dhamma. There will be those who will understand the Dhamma." Then, after giving the householder Anathapindika his advice, the Venerable Sariputta and the Venerable Ananda rose from their seats and departed. Soon after they had left, the householder Anathapindika died and reappeared in the Tusita heaven. Then, when the night was well advanced, Anathapindika, now a young god of beautiful appearance, went to the Blessed One, illuminating the whole of Jeta's grove. After paying homage to the Blessed One, he stood at one side and addressed to the Blessed One in stanzas. "O blessed is this Jeta's grove, dwelt in by the sagely Sangha, wherein resides the King of Dhamma, the fount of all my happiness, by action, knowledge, and Dhamma, by virtue and noble way of life. By these are mortals purified, not by lineage or wealth. Therefore, a wise person who sees what truly leads to his own good should investigate the Dhamma." Here, investigate doesn't mean analyze or rationalize. It means to see things as they really are and purify himself with it. Sariputta has reached the peak in virtue, peace, and wisdom's ways. Any bhikkhu who has gone beyond at best can only equal him. That is what the young god Anathapindika said, and the teacher approved. Then the young god Anathapindika, thinking the teacher has approved of me, paid homage to the Blessed One, and keeping him on his right, he vanished at once. When the night had ended, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, last night, when the night was well advanced, there came to me a certain young god of beautiful appearance who illuminated the whole of Jeta's grove. After paying homage to me, he stood at one side and addressed me in stanza thus. Repeats the whole verse. That is what the young god said. Then the young god, thinking the teacher has approved of me, paid homage to me, and keeping me on his right, he vanished at once. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, surely, Venerable Sir, that young god must have been Anathapindika. For the householder Anathapindika had perfect confidence in the Venerable Sariputta. Good, good, Ananda. As far as reasoning goes, you have drawn the right conclusion. That young god was Anathapindika, no one else. This is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Anybody have any questions?
Delson, when you talk about Nibbana, but I also read there's this thing called the Nibana Element. Is that a play on words? Are they the same thing?
It's the unconditioned, so it's the same thing. Nibbana Dhatu or Nibbana, it's just a different way of saying it. You have Nibbana spoken of in many different ways that are pointing to that particular unconditioned, let's say, experience, for lack of a better word. They call it the Nibana element, they call it the unformed, the unmade, the uncreated, they call it the unconditioned, they call it the island, the refuge, they call it the bliss, they call it all kinds of things. But all it is just pointers to the same thing. So, when we talk about the experience of Nibbana, one way of understanding it is there is the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And when you come back up, there's contact, but that contact is unconditioned. It's a contact known as that contact which is void or empty, that contact which is undirected, and that contact which is signless. And what that's referring to is that the mind has made contact with the Nibbana element. And what that's really saying is the mind has experienced the unconditioned, has experienced Nibbana. So it has completely let go, and having let go, experiencing Nibbana. Because of that, any contact that arises being void, meaning it's empty of any kind of personalizing, empty of any kind of identification, empty of any kind of sense of self. It is undirected because it understands that by creating an intention and starting to direct the mind towards something, it is going to experience dukkha because all things are impermanent and therefore conditioned, and therefore all things that are conditioned cease and are therefore liable to cause suffering. So it's undirected in that sense. The mind doesn't have any inclination to one way or the other. And it is signless because it sees the impermanence of all objects, all conditioned experiences. So it doesn't take anything as an object. So when we talk about in those two suttas, those side suttas that we're talking about, where there's a state of meditation, it might seem like it's talking about Nibbana being an object of meditation, but really what it is the experience of Nibbana is occurring, but there's no one there to experience it as such. It happens in such a way that there is no identifying going on. There's no one there to experience it.
So it's kind of like, there's really no other way to express it. You have to use the words that make it appear like it's a thing, but it isn't.
Yeah.
So,
And
okay.
really, if you think about the words themselves that are pointing to the experience of Nibbana, it's really pointing to the moments right after Nibbana and not actually Nibbana itself. Like the bliss that is experienced from Nibbana, the refuge that is experienced as Nibbana or from Nibbana, and so on. So it's only getting to the surface level, not really to the actual experience itself.
That's interesting. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Okay, it's unmuted. So, what is conditioned experience or unconditioned experience?
Conditioned experience is that which runs through dependent origination. So this is something we'll talk about maybe in the next Dhamma talk or the one after that we'll see. But the understanding is that all that we experience right now through the six sense bases and through what is being experienced even right now is all conditioned. What is it conditioned by? It's conditioned by contact. When you are listening to my voice, the experience itself is conditioned by my voice continuing and making contact with the ear. That contact is conditioned by the fact that you have nerves in the ear that are able to process what is being received in the way of sound waves. That ear is conditioned by mind and body. And then that mind and body is conditioned by consciousness. That consciousness is dependent upon and conditioned by intention or formations. And right now, formations, until you let go of completely craving, conceit, and ignorance, are fettered by and conditioned by ignorance, conditioned by the taints, the asavas, which we talked about a few days ago. So conditioned reality is everything you're experiencing right now. Conditioned reality is subject to change, subject to arising, and therefore subject to passing away. But the unconditioned is beyond the scope of dependent origination, is beyond contact, beyond conditioned contact, beyond conditioned feeling, beyond conditioned perception. It is basically the cessation of all conditions. And so unconditioned existence, or the unconditioned experience, rather, is where dependent origination no longer is experienced. There is no more dependent origination there.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. When I'm starting to create the meta feeling, in the beginning, I always force things a little bit, and I only start to observe after that. So, is this okay? Because you were talking before about creating, just observing the feeling, but I don't think I can do it, at least not right now, not in the beginning. So first I produce the feeling and then I observe it.
Right. So let's say you're radiating metta, right? You have the intention of radiating metta. You have the intention that this metta is going in this direction. When the metta is experienced, you're just observing how it's flowing. So you have to initialize some kind of action, mental action, in the form of intentionalizing the radiating of metta in one way or the other. And then once the metta flows, then you observe it. Yes.
Anathapindika was Sotapanna, but still he seemed to be afflicted by the illness that he was suffering from.
Yes. Yes. Sotapanna just means that you let go of the doubt in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. You let go of any belief in rites and rituals. And you no longer have a belief in a personal underlying self. But a Sotapanna is still subject to having craving or aversion. So whatever painful feelings arise, he's still subject to experiencing it as being me, mine, or myself, and has aversion towards it. An arhat also experiences, by the way, painful feeling. An arhat also can be ill. An arhat can also experience disease. But the difference is, while they experience physical pain because of those diseases or illnesses or sickness, they don't have any mental suffering attached to it. Yes.
During the Dhamma discourse, should we be focused only on listening, or should we also try to be aware of the meditation object? During the
Only to
Dhamma,
listening. Yeah, just listening. Just listening. Actually, you can imbue the listening with loving kindness in the sense of, for example, while you're driving a car, or while you're taking the bus, or while you're on the train, you're sitting and you might be reading a newspaper, or if you're driving, but your mind is preoccupied with other things. So it's doing the same thing. It's preoccupied, but it's also driving. In the same way, if you're listening, you can imbue that listening with loving kindness. You can imbue that listening with compassion. So it doesn't need to be one or the other. It can be integrated into one unified experience. Any other questions?
Maybe one. It kind of reminds me of when yourself or Bhante Vimala Ramsey talked about personality change. And I kind of understood what that meant, that you're not driven by your clinging anymore, so you're not responding as you normally would. But I kind of wondered about, is it possible to, like, I kind of knew someone who had, is it possible to be more of who you already are in not a good way? It's kind of like the leash is untied, and like one person I know of had said that they felt more peaceful and everything was okay, but to everybody else, it was like, you're still pretty neurotic. They appear kind of neurotic, but to them, everything was fine. So I kind of wonder, in terms of personality change, can it be, I imagine you would be influencing people in a more positive way, that your surroundings, everything would just be better, your relationships would be better, and so on. But is it possible it goes in the opposite direction, where you're just too much of yourself?
It would not be possible, because you're letting go of, let's say, those unwholesome aspects of the mind bit by bit. So with every attainment that someone has, they're letting go of further craving. They're letting go of further aversion. They're letting go of further reactions to situations that might be unwholesome. And they're thereby also cultivating wholesome objects of meditation, and therefore wholesome qualities of mind. So while they might appear to be to others as being neurotic, or as being, let's say, stern, or whatever it might be, that could just be a habitual tendency that arises in them as part of their personality. But it's not necessarily unwholesome. It's not necessarily something that causes pain to others. The other thing you also have to understand is, there is definitely going to be a perspective shift when somebody has an attainment, but not everybody will necessarily perceive it, meaning the outside world will not necessarily perceive that, and they might still have projected onto that person certain things like, oh, this person is neurotic, so they'll still expect them to be neurotic. Oh, this person is always this way, so they'll expect them to be this way in one way or another. So they have this sort of confirmation bias, and they try to look for the same kinds of things. But beyond that, I would say that it would be impossible when once somebody has an attainment to become worse off rather than be better off. And one reason, as I said, is because they're cultivating the wholesome tendencies of mind. But the second, as I said, is they're letting go of further attachments and craving. So while in the beginning they might seem neurotic, they might start to let go of that as well. And it's both, very immediate in terms of the attainment, but it's also gradual in terms of continually letting go, which leads to the next attainment and so on. And then finally, what I would say is, there are some personalities in different kinds of even what would be called fully awakened beings in the suttas. You have, there's a certain arhat whose name is Mahakassapa. And he was known to be a very strict and stern and sometimes rough around the edges kind of guy. He was somebody who loved spending a lot of time in the forest. He was somebody who really enjoyed being ascetic in nature. He took on what was known as the Dhutanga practices, which are optional practices for monastics. And there are different kinds of practices that you can do, like, only being able to function in 3 different postures, never lying down, or, wearing certain kinds of robes and never, accepting whatever food you get and other kinds of things like that. So he was known to be quite stern, and he was also someone who would kind of reproach people as well. There was one story where Ananda seemed to be spending a lot of time with the bhikkhunis, and this Mahakassapa actually gave a stern warning to Ananda, and he admonished him, and he said, you shouldn't be spending so much time with the bhikkhunis, you should be practicing. So you'll have different kinds of personalities or different expressions, but it's not necessarily that they are saying it out of attachment or out of craving. It's just how their personality has been built. There are other Arahat monks who are more, let's say, tranquil in nature. They're a little bit more relaxed, and there are others who are a little bit more analytical, like Sariputta. And then there are those who are a little more sensitive, like Moggallana. And then there are those who are, and then you have, of course, on the bhikkhuni side, you have someone like Dhammadina, who's very much an expert on the different states of meditation and the different aspects of the Eightfold Path. There's one sutta in particular, which is Majjhima Nikaya 44, where she actually goes through that whole process of the path and what is cessation of perception, feeling, consciousness, and so on. So you'll have different kinds of personalities, but what changes is internally the perspective shift and how you relate to the world and how you respond to the world rather than react to it. You see, the thing is, you are only responsible whether you are just on the path, you are a stream enterer, or you're an arahant. You are only responsible for your own actions, mental, verbal, and physical. Anything else anybody says, views, or thinks about, they're not responsible for at all. Any more questions?
I was thinking of Nibbana. It's stopping from all the akusala.
Yeah.
What about the kusala? Is stopping akusala, then is there kusala?
No, there's no kusala there either, because kusala also is conditioned.
Kusala is
It's the
also
complete-
conditioned. So is kusala
Yeah.
going on? In the Arahat, no. I think it's no, because there's Kiriya, like.
Yes.
So
So what-
everything is stopping.
Everything stops, yeah. So what this process is, basically, just to understand in the language of the suttas, is you go from the akusala to the kusala.
Yeah,
That is to say, you go from the unwholesome to the wholesome.
yeah.
And then you go from the wholesome to no longer identifying with the wholesome. Meaning the arhat's mind will still be wholesome to the extent of their actions being perceived as being wholesome. So they will still imbue loving kindness, they will still radiate compassion, they will still have all of these other wonderful qualities, but there will no longer be any more identification with the kusala. There will be no longer any personalizing of the wholesome.
Okay, want depersonalizing is also a kusala, in fact.
Well, you could see it in that way, in the sense that because the identifying then creates pride and conceit, which
Yes.
creates further clinging to the Dhamma. So the Arhat's actions, mental, verbal, or physical, is always impersonal.
Yes.
So it has no karmic effect.
Yeah, it's not,
That's why it is known as Kiriya. It has no further new birth of action, because there's no craving, there's no clinging, there's no bhava there.
yeah. Done.
Hello? Yeah, Delson, I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yes, just one second. Yotika, were you done with your questioning? Did you have another question?
Yeah, but it's okay. I think the whole thing sounds as if you can do it, can make it. But that's not, I think we cannot make so much.
Yeah, it's a natural unfolding.
It is
Yeah.
happening in a way. It is happening. But the thing, what can we do? What can we do anything? I don't know.
The only thing you can do is set your intentions in a wholesome manner and then allow
Really?
everything to unfold.
Really with intention? Yeah.
Yeah. Because intention is karma. Karma is intention.
But can we make intention? Can we that? Is that possible?
There's no one making the intention.
No.
It's happening because of causes and conditions.
Yeah, indeed, causes and conditions, but we do not have influence on the causes and the conditions, do we?
Only in that moment, in every given moment when there is an experience happening and there is mindfulness, there's the mind that is aware of what is happening. There's some level of understanding that there is a painful or pleasant or neutral experience.
Yeah.
And then there's a choice to either take it personal or see it as being anicca, dukkha, and anatta. If you see it as being anicca, dukkha, and anatta, then there's further letting go. So the only choice you have is either to hold on to it or to let go of it. But even the action of letting go ultimately is then conditioned by continual previous actions of letting go.
Okay.
So all it is reconditioning. It's not in the actual scope of dependent origination. When you have contact, feeling, and perception, there's only further reconditioning to come to the unconditioned. There's an experience of seeing the mind as being unwholesome and letting go of that and replacing it with the wholesome, and then further reconditioning of that until the mind lets go even of any attachment to that process. That's why it's a step-by-step process in that sense. First, you go from seeing the unwholesome, then you let go of that, replace it with the wholesome, then you realize that even the wholesome, and that realization happens automatically. It happens naturally. There's no personalizing there either. It's just an insight that arises. It's an experience that arises, which leads to letting go even of the whole.
But the real important moment is then just to be mindful of the moment.
Yes.
There.
Yes. Because that's only where then you can decide whether you want to let go or attach.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
You have any more questions, Yotika?
No, thank you for now.
Johan, you were saying something?
Now you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I have a question. Continuing the question, your explanation about personality of Arahat or enlightened beings. So what is your view or what is your answer about those teachers who are tranquil and powerful and who are good meditators, but obviously hurt many people? And And then it's quite confusing because on one hand, we know these teachers are good meditators once and then achieved some powerful ability. But on the other hand, after a while, it turned out these teachers actually hurt many people. And how can we understand this?
Yeah. Well, for one, just because you're a good meditator, it doesn't mean that you have an attainment. Or just because you have some level of understanding of the suttas doesn't mean you have an attainment. The way you should judge a teacher is how easily they're able to let go. If they find that somebody, or they find themselves being proven otherwise, and they're able to concede and say, okay, I understand what you're saying, rather than holding on and attacking. Or, of course, the way you understand a good teacher is if they're able to still be loving and kind, even after harsh criticism. If they're still being able to be balanced and magnanimous and neutral, even after being criticized for something, whether it's right or wrong. So when you hear about stories of abuse from teachers, or any kind of manipulation, or any kind of having power and then misusing that power, or whatever it might be, then those teachers obviously are not following the path. Because the whole point about the path is to continually let go. A true teacher doesn't have any interest in money, fame, or power, or control, or manipulation. In fact, a true teacher doesn't even have, and this might sound very strange, but doesn't even have an interest in their students' development, because there's no personal investment there. The student is responsible for their own experience, but the teacher will guide them and nudge them along the way. But because there's no personal investment in that student or what they're doing, there's no expectation, there's no pushing of the student. There's only a patient understanding, a patient nudging, a patient, okay, try it this way, try it that way. Don't do it this way, don't do it that way. But ultimately, a teacher is not even invested in their students because they have no clinging at all. Well, in this case, let's say the Arahat teacher.
Ah, yeah, Arahat teachers. It's very hard to find, But so let's not think about Arahat, but if the teacher is, for example, Sotapanna or Sakadagami, or in that level, then do you think that's possible? Those teachers can make mistakes that hurt students, or not even this attainment are maybe not true,
Right. So if a teacher was, let's say, a Sotapanna or a Sakadagami, in the case of a Sotapanna, they would still have anger arise, they would still have irritation arise, they would still have some kind of craving arise in them. Even with the Sakadagami, but a Sakadagami can recover from it quicker, more mindful of being able to detect when the craving arises or when the aversion arises. So I would venture to say, even if a teacher was a Sotapanna or was a Sakadagami, they still wouldn't abuse students. They might berate them, they might shout at them, they might get irritated by them, but they won't abuse them to such an extent that it causes pain to the student, because they would possibly shout at the student, or they would possibly get irritated by the student because they still have a personal vested interest in the student's development, greater development. If a student is not doing one thing or another, they might get irritated by it, they might get annoyed by it, and they try to then correct the student, but the way of their correcting is not necessarily harmonious or effective or wholesome all the time. But they won't abuse or manipulate their power to an extent that causes pain and suffering to the student, causes pain and suffering to.
So any advice? I have clients who had a long time, suffering because of these experiences, and how can I help them with Yeah. Because then they lost the faith. They lose faith in Dhamma. And how can we help them to rebuild the faith and go on the practice?
I would say that there is no teacher.
Mm-hmm.
There is only the teaching. So I tell them
Mm-hmm.
that they shouldn't place their faith
Mm-hmm.
in any teachers, no teachers at all. They should place their faith in, if they want to, place their faith in the teachings, go back to the suttas, and understand that if there is a teacher teaching from the suttas, not only teaching, but implementing the suttas, then they can have some level of trust to be guided by such a teacher. But in this world, there are no Dhamma teachers. There are only those who have walked the path of Dhamma and know the territory in the forest of Dhamma and can point you in this way or in that way and nudge you along in this. There's no such thing as a teacher. They don't place a faith in anyone who calls themselves.
Oh yeah, nice wording. That's good explanation. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it is you have a position that if it's the teacher or somebody who's teaching Dhamma is causing a lot of pain to others, that means that they didn't attain what we read in the suttas, right?
And they should stop teaching the Dhamma and start learning it first.
Yeah, but many of them passed away already.
Well, I mean, let's say those who are alive right now.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah. Okay, so okay, thank you.
Maybe to add, it's all about the intention behind a person's actions, I would say. I mean, an arahant would never intentionally hurt someone, but it might be that a person would feel hurt because of their wording, but the intention would always be from compassion and loving kindness and things like that.
Well, but that's I don't know about that, because when I see the cases and when I see the teachers, they are not aware that this is kind of more ignorance part, what they do. So, I mean, if you ask teachers, of course, I don't think they will say, oh, I had an intention to hurt people. But there is some hidden or ignorant part or shadow part, or so when they act anyway, there are causes and there are effects of suffering of others. And so if we say intention, we have a kind of amount of place you can see ourselves what intention is, right? Because most of us are not really fully aware of true intention of of our consciousness. So I think it is also dangerous to say, like, if we don't have intention. Of course, we don't have intention if we are practicing, but many of the time, when I see like, oh, how come, and if you ask, oh, this teachers, oh, I didn't mean it, or but the action or obvious actions and result causing a lot of troubles, a lot of pains for the people. So yeah.
Well, to simplify the subtleties, to understand it in this way when we're talking about intention, is to say if they made that action, or if they did that action, there was an obvious choice to do that action. When we talk about intention, we're talking about choices here. Some kind of decision was made to act in this way. But the intention being in the sense that if there is a wholesome intention for an individual who wants to better their student, or they may say something that's stern and the student might perceive that as being abusive, there's no intention behind those stern words or the words that are being said to be necessarily abusive. They're not abusive. They are just trying to wake that person up to say, don't do it this way, look at it that way. But there is a conscious choice in some actions, like manipulation, like rape, like molestation, like all of these other things. There's still a choice there. And so there's intention behind those things. Even if a person says, I didn't have an intention of doing that, or that was not my intention, there was still a conscious choice made to head in that direction. And that is beginning with some kind of intention, some kind of unwholesome intention underlying that.
or I find it more like they don't see it. There is an intention, and then when they make the choice, kind of, you know, the in our Buddhist language, more craving or, you know, the clinging, kind of making action. So it is cheating.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I try to understand. Because
Yeah.
I
But you're right
couldn't
about
really-
that. You're right
yeah.
about the ignorance. You're right about the ignorance. Because there's ignorance, they're not able to be mindful of what their intentions are. And then they're not mindful of what their intentions are. They make those conscious choices nevertheless, not aware that those choices are unwholesome or those choices are creating pain or suffering. And if that's the case, that doesn't justify what their actions are. That doesn't justify or excuse them of their actions, but rather points and sheds light on the teacher's inabilities themselves. It sheds light on the fact that that teacher needs more practice.
Yeah, because the thing is, all the reason we are practicing this path is we want to be, of course, be happy and free, but also, you know, be a better human being. So when we see, oh, these are the like product of, you know, this Dhamma practice, we see them, you know, they said, oh, they are happy and free and brilliant, but then at the same time causing the trouble or hurting others. I don't think that's, you know, that does make sense. You know, I think it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
You see, the thing is, a teacher is not qualified by how eloquently they speak or what amazing encyclopedic knowledge of the Dhamma they have, of the suttas and things like that. First and foremost, they have to have a strong moral foundation, strong ethical foundation. And that goes back to our teachings. That goes back to the teachings of the Buddha. First, you start with sila. Then you can think about samadhi and insight, which are a natural unfolding of having a strong moral foundation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just one last question. So, don't you think it's possible that someone becomes so liberated that they don't follow any moral guidelines anymore?
No.
Okay, that was my question. Thanks.
You see, the thing is, there are certain things in arahat, which in the context of Buddhism, an arahat is considered to be the fully liberated person, being or non-being. But there are things that they cannot do. There are certain things that they cannot do. Number one, they cannot kill or harm anyone intentionally. They cannot tell an intentional lie. If they know it to be a lie, they will not tell it. They cannot intentionally take what is not given. They cannot intentionally have sex. They won't be able to have sex. They have no interest. They won't be able to have any kind of sexual misconduct. So, and there's a couple of other things. So, do you remember the 5 things that an arahat is incapable of doing?
Well, they will not use intoxicants, for instance.
Yes.
No sensual misconduct. I think
obviously they won't kill their mother and father. That's one of the big ones. They won't kill they kill another arahat, and they won't, if a Buddha is around, they won't shed the blood of a Buddha with the intention to harm. So there's always going to be, in a fully liberated being, it's like a programming or an operating system that's installed in the mind of a fully liberated being, where that software system is basically the Eightfold Path. And part of that Eightfold Path also includes the morality of it. That includes the 5 precepts and so on. Any last questions? Okay. Let's share some merit.
Let's hope my bird stays quiet. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Delson. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you,
a
everyone.
great day.
See you all tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.